everyone, this is 4.1, Sensation, Hearing, and Vision. The objective for today is by the end of the lesson, you should be able to explain the basic principles of sensory transduction, including absolute threshold, difference threshold, signal detection, sensory adaptation, and describe the sensory process of both hearing and vision. The basic principles of sensation and perception. Sensation is when you take things in your environment, which we call stimulus, and our body processes them via sensory receptors that we have all over, in our eyes, in our nose, on our body. The example might be something like smells and or temperature that is received through our sensory receptors in our nose and on our skin, and that is sensation. Perception is how we feel about those sensations. So we notice a sensation and then we interpret it. And that's the perception portion, is how we interpret that. So for example, if something smells good or if something smells bad, if the temperature makes you cold or if the temperature makes you hot, that's your perception. When we see sensory transduction, that is the actual electrical signal process of sensation. So it is the actual electrical signal that comes from, let's say, our skin into our nervous system, so into our peripheral and then central nervous system, or the actual electrical signal that comes from our nose into our peripheral and then finally central nervous system. So it's the actual electrical process of the sensation itself. I think of transduction. I like to think of electricity whenever I see that word. These two things work together. Sensation and perception works together. Example, bottom-up processing. This is when we first take our senses and then that goes to our mind. So if you close your eyes for a moment, I might ask you just to think about the very basics of what you feel. Maybe the pencil or pen in your hand or the desk on your hand, the way you feel as you sit in this chair, maybe the exact temperature that your skin is feeling. So it's all just like the bottom basics. If you take a look at the picture to the right, I might ask you exactly what you see. For example, what color are the horses, or what color is the man wearing? How many horses do you see? So things that are very, very basic. Top down is when I give you something in the mind first. I might set the expectation. So if we take the same picture and I'm setting an expectation for this picture, and then I'm asking you what you see, that's top down. So whereas bottom up, I ask you just the basics about your sensation and then the mind, this I'm asking you about the mind first, setting an expectation, and then your senses are coming into play. So I'm going to ask you how many faces you see in this picture. Take a minute, see if you can count them, see if you notice them. Did you notice the face that is right here? We've got our two eyes and our nose and our mouth. The face that's right here, again, two eyes, nose, mouth. Face that's right here, two eyes, nose, mouth. Again, right here, eyes, nose, mouth. There's some in the background right here, one right there as well. So one here in the trees. So this is top down. I set an expectation. I told you to count faces. Maybe some of you started to notice those faces in the picture that you didn't notice before, and then you start noticing the details afterwards. Selective attention. Why you don't hear your parents or your teacher? Well, part of this is cocktail party effect. And this would not explain why you don't hear your parents. This would explain why you can hear your parents in a crazy crowded room. The cocktail party effect allows you to zone in on somebody that you're talking with. So even though there might be distractions around you, you can still hear and focus on that person that you're talking with. At the same time, it also explains how if you're talking with somebody and you're in a crowded room, you can hear somebody say your name across the room. It's this weird ability that we have to kind of zone in on specific details or pick up on specific details. On the flip side of that, you also have selective inattention, and this would be why you don't hear your parents when they call you. And we could have unintentional blindness. This is when we accidentally miss something completely, don't even notice it, even though it's there. You also have change blindness, which is when you miss something that changes. Oh, sorry. This goes not just with blindness, but can also go with deafness. So maybe you unintentionally don't hear something even though it's there, or you don't notice a change in it. I'm going to show you a quick video that gives a great example of selective inattention.
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn.
Okay. So in that video, you would have seen unintentional blindness if you missed the gorilla, and change blindness if you didn't notice the curtain changing color or the person leaving the game. Thresholds. A threshold is something that you only notice 50% of the time. So it's the minimum amount of something that you would notice. Off to the right here are a set of examples of the different thresholds. One example is 50% of the time you can see a candle flame 30 miles away if it's pitch black and there's no other light. Signal detection is going to explain to us or show us or predict, I guess I should say, how and when we may detect a faint stimulus. This is kind of going against absolute. It's saying there really isn't an absolute. It just kind of depends on the person, whether or not you notice something. It also kind of depends on what else is going on. Maybe you're distracted. A difference threshold, or just noticeable difference, is the amount of change we can detect. Ernest Weber called this Weber's law, and essentially what he said is that it has to be a percentage. It's not a number. And the best example of this is weight. For weight, it has to be a 2% change in order for somebody to notice a difference in that change. So if you hold 10 pounds, in order for you to notice that there's a difference in the weight that you're holding, it has to be 10.2 pounds. So if you're holding 100 pounds, it has to be 102 pounds for you to notice the difference. Oops, sorry, subliminal messaging kind of got covered over here. Subliminal messaging is anything that we can sense stimuli below the threshold, it is possible to prime our response. So you know how we said we only notice things 50% of the time? That other 50% of the time, it's still there, we just may not realize it. That would be considered subliminal, right? We're still sensing it, we just don't know we're sensing it. Now, that's not really going to change much for you most of the time, but what they did notice is it may prime your response. So it may kind of set you up a little bit, but it's not going to be enough to really change who you are or what you do. And sensory adaptation is just saying that we become less sensitive to things when it's not changing. So if we're being exposed to it over time. For example, a funky smell in your house. Maybe you don't realize it, but if somebody comes over, they'll say, "Ooh, it smells." Vision. How is it that our eyes work? Well, first it has to, again, turn it into energy, right? And that's called transduce, when we take the light itself and turn it into energy so that our neurons can process it. There are 3 psychological aspects to light. The first is brightness, which is measured by the height of the wave. The second is hue, which is measured by the length of the wave. And the third is saturation, which is a purity mixture of wavelengths. So how exactly is it that we see, per se? Well, first, light has to enter via your cornea. So that's this layer right there. So the light's going to enter that. Then it travels through a hole in your iris. The iris is the colored part of your eyes, into the pupil, which is right here, the black part. The ability to focus on items close and far away is called visual accommodation, and that's actually going to happen in this part right here with the lens. Your lens can flex and move, which allows you to see things close and far. If you need glasses, you are adding an additional lens on top, or even a contact lens, because this lens isn't functioning properly. So you're using a faux lens or a fake lens. What happens is the item that you see then travels through the lens. It actually gets flipped upside down and gets projected on the back of the eye, which is called the retina. Oops, sorry. Vision, brightness, and color. First, we have brightness. Brightness our eyes see by rods, and that can detect mostly black and white. So this is when you're going to notice that somebody turned off the light, is because of your rods. When somebody turns off the light, it's called dark adaptation, where you adapt to the dark. And when they turn the lights back on again, yay! It's called light adaptation. We adapt to light and color. So how do we see color? That's through our cones. Our cones are in the back of the retina, and that allows us to see color in detail. There are a few different theories on why we see color the way we see it. The first is called the trichromatic theory. And people now think this is actually the action part of seeing color. And this is that you see variations of red, green, and blue. But this doesn't explain what we call an after image. So this is if you stare at one of those colors for a long period of time and then look away at a blank wall, you will see the opposite color. Psychologists began to call this opponent process theory. And this does a better job of explaining the actual system itself. And what they say is that cones have pairs that cannot fire at the same time. So what that means is you either see blue or you see yellow, but you can't see a blue-yellow color. It's one or the other. This also helps to explain maybe why people are colorblind. And what we know about colorblindness is that it is a genetic defect in the cones. So if you look at this right here, you may have a hard time seeing that there's a number 5 in it because you are red-green colorblind. Hearing. How is it that we hear? Well, first there's the pitch, and that's how the frequency of a wave that enters into your ear. The second is volume, and that's the amplitude of the wave that enters your ear. And finally, we have timbre, which is the purity of that wave entering your ear. So how pure can we hear? We can hear typically anywhere from 20 to 20,000 hertz, which is a wave per second. What happens is sound enters the pinna, which is the outside part of your ear, travels down our auditory canal, vibrates these 3 little bones that are all right here, that are attached to the oval window, which is right here. That causes the liquid in this cochlea here to vibrate, looks like a snail. And inside of the cochlea are teeny tiny little microscopic hairs. These aren't the gross old hairs that your grandpa has hanging out of his ear. These are teeny, teeny tiny. And these hairs are connected to the auditory nerve, which then begins to move and send messages. Listening to music too loud can damage those microscopic hairs in the cochlea, and you cannot repair them once they have been damaged. So, pitch perfect. How exactly does this work? Well, first is this idea of place theory, that depending on where the cochlea your wave enters is what stimulates it, and that's how we hear. The other idea is just the overall frequency of how fast vibrations are coming into the ear. And the third and final is volley, and this is where they say the hair cells take turn firing. Like, think about like a volley in volleyball. And that is it for today.